Welcome to this special episode of Time CEO G Gas Power Southeast Asia. Deepesh, thank you so much for joining us, and it's a pleasure having you on this special broadcast of Times Now Summit. But I want to start with a very basic fundamental question. You know, in last couple of years, we have seen a lot of consciousness and a lot of effort towards renewable energy, climate consciousness, carbon neutrality, decarbonization. We all know the kind of goals that India has self-committed to when it comes to carbon neutrality. You are a key stakeholder in this entire ecosystem. How are you looking at this whole evolution that's taking place so rapidly in India when it comes to climate consciousness?
I think to set the context, we as the universe, we've taken up this target of limiting the increase in temperature up to 1.5 degrees at the 2050 point as compared to the prehistoric age. Now, if you were to measure as to what's the increase already so far, it's close to 0.2 degrees. So there is very little room left between now and 2050. And if you were to quantify as to how emissions play a role in increasing the world's temperature, we only have the limitation of 500 gigatons of carbon dioxide and no more between now and 2050 for us to limit or cap the increase in temperature up to 1.5 degrees. Now, if you look at our annual emissions in terms of CO2, it's in the range of 34 to 35 gigawatts. So in 28 years between now and 2050, the allowance that we have per year is only 17 gigatons of carbon dioxide. To do that, we will have to massively reduce the emissions, and one way to do that is the energy sector. Now, within the 35 gigatons of emissions, approximately 40% is related to the power sector. And I think that's where we play a role as a stakeholder in reducing the emissions by providing clean energy.
Deepesh, what I also want to understand before we start getting into details is the fact that, you know, while there is this constant argument that if we look at per capita carbon emissions, it's still way lower in India compared to some of the other developed countries. Obviously, US or China, when we compare to them, our emissions, per capita emissions are much lower. But at the same time, what everybody has observed in last 4 or 5 years is India happens to be at the epicenter of the adverse effects of climate change that is happening through the world, which means right from governments to corporates to even citizens, everybody will have to basically be far more conscious about the climate safety.
You make a very pertinent point. India is at the receiving end. It plays a role in containing the emission equation. So does the developing world. I think the responsibility has to be shouldered across the globe, and I'm so happy that India has taken a lead forward in coming up with, you know, the green energy policy of the Indian government. If I were to look back before 2014, we had a single-digit installed base of renewable energy. Today, we have already galloped beyond the 100 gigawatt point, and we have this target of achieving 450 gigawatts by the end of 2030. I think this role that India is playing is vital for all of us to reduce the temperature or to just cap the temperature of the earth to 1.5 degrees centigrade.
Right. Now, Deepesh, like you rightly mentioned that, you know, power sector obviously is a very key component if we look at the overall carbon emissions basket also, and therefore there is huge scope of actually improving situation here. Now, from GE's point of view, you know, how are you prioritizing your investments in powering technology for cost effectively, you know, scaling renewables and actually help India sort of move towards a net zero, you know, gas power generation kind of a thing, maybe faster than what otherwise will happen?
Two, three things come to mind. One is our wind turbine portfolio. If you look at GE's contribution in terms of installation on wind turbines across the globe, I'd say since 2002, we've added almost 55,000 wind turbines across the globe. Carbon-free electricity being made available. We have a large installed base of wind turbines in India as well. Number two, using gas turbines for a transition fuel from high carbon intensive to low carbon fuels. Let me give you an example. The fastest way for you to reduce emissions on carbon dioxide is to switch from coal. And if you do that switch from coal to natural gas, you bring down the carbon footprint by 50%. And then if you were to add a combination of, say, wind, solar, natural gas, and batteries, you can bring down the carbon footprint by almost 85%. Now, GE plays a role across all these technologies. We play a role not just being an OEM, we also play a role in bringing the entire ecosystem together, working with stakeholders in the government, in the private sector, and putting together solutions which are compelling. The road ahead looks extremely exciting for us.
Deepesh, I want to understand, and basically it's more from a layman's perspective, because everybody talks about sustainability, renewable energy, climate consciousness. Now, technology plays a very crucial role, and if we look at your global contribution as well as contribution in India, it's huge. So the technological advancement that we have seen over the last couple of years, how are they playing up, and how this whole technological revolution is playing out when it comes to renewable energy?
I would say what the world has seen in the last 2 decades in terms of the cost of renewable energy, which is wind and solar, coming down, has been one big advantage for the environment in terms of the cost of electricity coming down, because electricity is a backbone industry. It touches common lives. It's a very price sensitive market, and the price of renewable energy coming down is a big advantage, and technology has played a role in the cost of electricity coming down on wind and solar. Number two, as the cost of electricity has come down on wind and solar, there has been an installed base increase in wind and solar. But with that, the grids have become vulnerable, just given the intermittency of both wind and solar. That's where I think technologies like hydro, gas, batteries play a role against the grid. Now, if I were to give an example, that for us to achieve round-the-clock carbon-free electricity, there is investment now in technology coming up. Especially, you hear about the Indian government's mission on hydrogen. I think that will play, again, a very key and pivotal role in ensuring that we have round-the-clock electricity, which is green and carbon-free. For this to be successful, we'll have to make it sustainable, but we'll also have to make it extremely affordable.
There is obviously a lot of excitement and commitment from various stakeholders when it comes to usage of green hydrogen. Now, from a technology point of view, I want to understand from you. One is how challenging it is to effectively deploy the technology and utilize green hydrogen as one major source of clean energy.
If I were to take the Indian hydrogen production capability as of today, India produces close to 6 to 7 million tons of grey hydrogen today. And the utilization of this is primarily in the fertilizer and the petrochemical segment. Early this year, the Indian government came up with a plan to produce up to 5 million tons per annum of green hydrogen by the year 2030. So the combination of grey and green and hydrogen by the end of 2030 will be close to 11 to 12 million tons. Now, the green hydrogen production happens through renewable energy. And if you look at an ecosystem where you install renewable energy which is absorbed by the grid, but there will be moments in the grid because of intermittency that you'll have to curtail the renewable energy. That curtailed energy, as example number one, can be fed into an electrolyzer. The electrolyzer converts water into hydrogen, and you store hydrogen at the same location where you produce the hydrogen. Now, on the other side of the storage, you attach a battery of gas turbines which have the ability to ramp up, ramp down quickly, and then if you integrate this system, then you absorb all the wind energy that you can. Likewise for solar, and that you cannot, you pump it into an electrolyzer, convert that to hydrogen, and then during moments of intermittency and gaps where you don't have wind and solar, the gas turbines operate on hydrogen. Now, this entire system coming together in terms of cost, if you look at the prices today, at today's cost, you can deliver electricity at almost 6 rupees per kilowatt hour. Now, this is 6 rupees per kilowatt hour of carbon-free, round-the-clock green energy with a 90% availability. Now, as the cost of green energy on wind and solar keeps coming down, you can also think of having dedicated stations, dedicated plants just to feed electricity to electrolyzers, to convert water into hydrogen and have that stored. Instead of transporting hydrogen, which might be challenging, you can store hydrogen at the same location and convert that to electricity. And instead of transporting hydrogen, you transport the green electron. The costs will have to be understood. We will have to seek inputs from the government in terms of policy advocacy and kind of mandates that the government is likely to come up with, and hence all the different stakeholders coming together, which is renewable energy companies that are into manufacturing of electrolyzers, storage, compressors, gas turbines, and then the end user segment. The interesting part is that there is a community of buyers that is now coming together. As an example, there is an international community called the RE100. This is 100 companies that have a mandate only to buy green electricity. In fact, that list is now approximately 350 companies. It becomes the end user market, at least in phase one of the deployment. And as capacities increase, as economies of scale kick in, the cost equation gets easier for us to handle.
Dollar economy, the per capita carbon emission is also going to go up and the energy consumption is also going to pick up. So ideally, obviously we'll have to look at more than one source to actually genuinely decarbonize the consumption that we will be driving in the future. So what kind of ideal scenario you have in mind when it comes to decarbonization? Because obviously it will have to be more than one source.
I think option number one for India is to continue the path of aggressively increasing the footprint on renewable energy, which is wind, solar, hydroelectricity. Keep maximizing on that. And I think we're well on our path towards doing that. Option number two, or the next step two, is to look at the grid. Look at the grid in terms of coming up with tweaks or newer grids that can handle the intermittency to absorb all the renewable energy that we produce. Step three is to introduce technologies like gas turbines and batteries to handle the intermittency. Step four is that as the cost decreases on renewable energy, come up with an ecosystem in select key states in India which have the vantage point advantage of land, water availability closer to ports, to put large scale hydrogen hubs. Now these hydrogen hubs will produce hydrogen or green hydrogen based on the massive footprint that we have created and we're going to create of renewable energy. The next step is to come up with policies that can reduce the cost of hydrogen and provide an incentive for both the private and the public sector to come up with these large hydrogen hubs. Then the consumption case. The consumption case will have to be based on a priority. I think the first priority in India would be fertilizers, followed by petrochemical. But there will be one segment on electricity, which is what I explained earlier, that hydrogen that's produced at these hydrogen hubs can be fed into gas turbines to generate electricity, which is 100% carbon free.
You know, Deepesh, because obviously this is a subject where everybody knows that something needs to be done and otherwise there is going to be a problem. The policymakers are also obviously aware and conscious, but at a policy level, you know, from policy regime point of view, do you think what India is already doing in terms of rolling out various incentives for renewable energy and all, apart from that, is there something more which can be done which sort of fastens this pace?
That's a great question. In terms of policy, I would again advocate for three specific things that be done in terms of the policy. Number one is to define a financial package or a financial budget for green electricity that can be utilized by firms that come up with these plants that produce, say, for example, hydrogen within a specified time frame. That is, if I were to avail the financial package or the benefit that the government would offer, then I should be compelled to start my manufacturing unit within a certain period of time. Number two, the credits that we offer for renewable energy, I think that can be factored into the equation of the SOPs that will be available for the manufacturing of hydrogen per se. And number three, come up with a carbon trading platform, not just in India, but also cross-border, such that all these three initiatives will add up to reduce the cost of hydrogen. Now, in terms of actual numbers, if you take 1 kg of hydrogen at $1, the equivalent in energy terms is $7.4 per MMBTU, which should be our target. And I recall that India has already defined its target of 1, which is in 1 decade bring down the cost of hydrogen of 1 kg to $1. But for us to reach that, we'll have to come up with a well-defined financial package. Number two, time-based incentives so that we achieve this within the given specified time. And third, come up with innovative models to monetize the renewable energy and the carbon delta that RE produces by coming up with a carbon credit mechanism, not just for India, but also cross-border.
Is it also possible to mandate use of green hydrogen gas in some of the large industries, which extensively use mechanisms like turbines? Is it possible or practical to implement a policy like that?
I think that's again a very good question, and I suppose that's the step that the government is already embarking on, is to come up with mandates for the use of hydrogen. Now, this will have to be done very thoughtfully. We'll have to test existing infrastructure on how much hydrogen the existing infrastructure itself is capable of handling. For example, our existing gas pipelines, blending of natural gas with hydrogen, how much of it can be done right now without any change or with minimal change. So that can be mandate number one that can be given, because mandates will be important to define the use case, to define what's the market demand, and that will drive investments.
Deepesh, I mean, we all know the critical role that GE has played in India's industrial development across all sectors. Going forward, at a company level, what are your plans? Because if India is going to go after renewable energy and decarbonization so aggressively, obviously you will be playing a role of a catalyst and a very crucial role. So at a company level, what is your vision? How are you planning your next maybe 5-10 years, which are going to be very crucial from climate point of view any which ways for India?
So you'd have heard that GE has announced the spin-off of its companies into 3 different businesses. The business that I come from is GE Gas Power, which is now a part of GE Vernova. Now, GE Vernova is a set of 12 GE businesses that serve the energy sector. Now, if you look at GE Vernova's mandate, our mandate is to reduce the CO2 grams per kilowatt hour across the 12 businesses that we participate. So on a cumulative basis, if you take all the differences, all the different businesses that we are in, which is wind turbines, gas power, electricity grids, software, if you put all these businesses together, then our aim is to be seen as reducing the grams CO2 per kilowatt hour. And to do this, we're coming up with investments in technology, in each of these businesses, keeping a very, very clear focus on what's the target that we should achieve to reduce the grams CO2 per kilowatt hour.
Also, the general belief, and again, it's almost linking back to my first question that we asked, from a layman's point of view, when we talk about global warming, when we talk about climate consciousness, everybody seems to believe that this is, some ice is melting in polar region, which is going to affect polar bears first. That consciousness that it is going to hit home maybe much faster and in a much more severe way, then it will probably hit polar region simply because of the population density here. What would be your message to, probably leaders of tomorrow, the youth, the companies of tomorrow? What would be your message to them?
I think, one probably does not need to overemphasize now the impact that climate change is having on the environment. Just look at what's happening around us, be it in the neighboring country where it saw floods like never before in the past, or even the Western world where Florida apparently had a hurricane which was the most severe since 1936, the impact of climate change is for real. The inconvenient truth here is that the targets that we have set for ourselves, which is the 1.5 degrees max increase in temperature by 2050, probably is going to be a challenge because we've already touched the 1.2. And as I mentioned earlier, for us to cap it to 1.5, all that we have is only 500 gigatons of CO2 in the next 28-year period. Now, the awareness of this, has to strike everybody, that it's more than likely that we're going to exceed that 1.5 degrees. Now, whether that 1.5 is 1.7 or 1.8 or 2 degrees is for us to see. But then achieving that 1.5 is extremely challenging. And to your question, my message to communities, including the youth, is to take cognizance of this fact that this target of capping the Earth's temperature to 1.5 degrees is not an easy one. It will take everybody to contribute to reduce emissions. We'll also have to come up with technology to capture emission. We'll also have to come up with technology to go negative carbon. And in that continuum, I think what India is doing currently is very inspiring, especially the Honorable Prime Minister mentioning about green hydrogen in the last 3 Independence Day speeches, coming up with a clear policy guideline. The implementation is now for all of us to get together and embark upon.
That's very encouraging. Deepesh, thank you so much for joining us on this conversation, and we are absolutely delighted and looking forward to catch up with you at Times Now Summit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mihir.
The world's largest democracy